Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Avorion episode 12. I'm Enigmius, and today I'm starting a brand new build, which is always fun. I always like starting new builds. There's that whole idea of unlimited potential for creativity and not so many mistakes that we've already sort of made it difficult for ourselves. This build is, as I mentioned at the end of the last episode, intended to be another early game ship that we're making, having gained a bit of experience through the process of building and then using our first ship, the Spirit, and some of the lessons that came out of that. So one of the first things you may notice is that we started building the ship. It places the core block for us, and then I built all the way around that core block with armor blocks. You can tell they're armored blocks because of that camouflage pattern. The whole idea being, we've got this core block, and as far as I know, that's the block which, when it's destroyed, signals that your ship is disabled, destroyed, whatever you want to call it. So we want to protect that and prevent the premature destruction of our vessels whenever we possibly can. And it made sense to kind of start off with that sort of reinforcement around the core. I don't necessarily at this point want to be building entirely out of armor or doing like the entire outer hull out of armor, because of the mass involved. I don't mind necessarily the ship getting shot up, because the repair feature in the game means you never have to rebuild anything if you don't want to. Once the ship is finished and it's been saved, the game has a record of it, and if you need to repair the ship, it just repairs it to what it used to be, which is kind of a cool feature. Not something that we've seen a lot of in this kind of environment before, the open world sandbox kind of voxel scenario. So that's something that I was able to keep in mind throughout this process. I don't have to worry so much about the repair process, but I do have to worry about protecting the core and certain other key elements. So that's kind of what we're doing. Now the overall design ideas for this ship is, one, it's going to be quite a bit larger than the Spirit. The purpose for that is to distribute the critical systems across a wider area, so that we're not, basically with the Spirit, I guess the easiest way to describe it is when we're flying a little wee tiny ship and bad guys are shooting at us, they're basically hitting the whole ship all at once. And so we're losing turrets, and we're losing thrusters, and we're losing interior things that were supposed to be protected, and then we lose the core. And the enemy never really has to give a whole lot of thought about where they're shooting us, because they just have to shoot in our general direction, and it's also small, and that it's very easy for them to do a lot of damage. So we're making things a little bit larger so that we can account for that, provide ourselves with a little bit more room to hide things, and also, if we want to have more cargo space, or if we want to have more of this, more of that, we'll have the space inside relatively well protected where we can put that. That's kind of a thing. In this case, I'm going with sort of like the elongated main hull section, and then a bunch of outriggers, and call them nacelles or whatever, exterior structural elements that will be holding things like the engines and thrusters, and in a lot of cases turrets, so that the turrets aren't all stacked beside one another and getting destroyed all at once. That sort of thing. And in this case, getting things started, you can see we're going sort of like a flattened circle, or maybe even a flattened ellipse, depending on how you want to look at it. And working around this front section, this nose section, at the time that I was placing these blocks that you see here, I'd already decided that I didn't like that profile. I wanted something that was a little bit flatter on the front, and I just couldn't help myself. I just was having so much fun stacking blocks in place. So that's what I did. I stacked a bunch of blocks in place until very bizarre sort of thing. This is being built in a creative world. The whole idea being that I can sit down and I can build a ship, and then once the ship is built, then I can go into the PvE survival kind of scenario, gather the materials that I need in order to build the ship, and then build it from the blueprint. That's kind of the whole idea here. But I didn't expect that in the process of doing all of this, look at this guy. This isn't the first time that I've been attacked while I was building a ship, but this was the first time where I was kind of sitting here looking. You can see I'm looking around, I'm like, okay, he's hitting us. Yeah, he's hitting us all over, and he's doing damage. There's already a missing piece. And he's over there, and now he's shooting at the spirit that we have parked off in the distance. He's just being a royal pest, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what do we do? I jumped into the spirit, and I was like, okay, well, really, the only realistic approach to this is to shoot back, and the only ship that we have that's in a position to do that right now is the spirit. So he was close enough that we could make small enough adjustments that the turrets didn't stop shooting, and there we go. You saw that explosion basically across the entire ship. That was the indication that we had destroyed his core, and he was disabled, but I wasn't convinced, so that's why I kept shooting until I realized there's another guy shooting at us. And I'm trying to figure out where it's coming from. I was basically following the tracer, but I followed them in the wrong direction. I turned around, here he is, and I'm like, okay, well, we'll get rid of this guy, and then hopefully we can get back to building. Unfortunately, being that this is the spirit, that wasn't meant to be. We're shooting, we're making good contact, we're not necessarily hitting all of the spots that I would like to hit, and we're also, I should point out, sitting still, and the reason for that is so that I can move around a little bit and just keep the guns going. So it wasn't the best, and you can see as soon as the spirit is disabled, it goes back after the new ship. I spawned in a new spirit, and this one had no turrets, so I decided to see what I could do in the way of ramming. And I'm doing a little bit of damage, a tiny bit of damage, nothing really significant, not enough to prevent this guy from being a righteous pest. Eventually, and it won't take too much longer, he's going to disable this spirit. And then I was kind of thinking to myself, again, what are my options? Realistically, because it's a creative world, the only viable option would have been in my drone to fly away, get some distance from this guy, and then spawn in one of the most recent saves from our new ship and continue from there. I actually decided to start a new creative game save, start from the very beginning, load the save there, the idea being that there would be a little bit of extra time between the very beginning of the universe until the bad guys start spawning in and making pests of themselves again. Hopefully that would give us a little bit more time to get this guy squared away. So that was sort of the side action that we had working on this, and it also sort of reinforced if the original combat anecdotal evidence that we had from the last episode wasn't enough. By this point, it should be pretty clear the spirit was not really suited to life in this universe. Yes, I could have been moving around a little bit more, and it would have disabled my guns for most of the time anyways. So it was 6 of one, half dozen of the other. We had a little bit of a reminder, and now we're back to this process of building this guy out. Now, when we get to this front section, and this is sort of like the dead horse being beaten yet again, multiple sections, many curves converging in one area, and trying to make everything fit together, it becomes more and more difficult as we go. And if you look very closely, you'll see that it's actually, the hull is actually starting to take on this concave sort of thing. If you look to the left side, it's a little bit difficult to see because the lighting isn't super, there we go, you can see there, just follow it along, and it does a little bit of a wavy thing instead of just this nice soft curve working its way gradually down. That to me was really not ideal. It wasn't sort of the look that I was going for. I kind of thought about it, and if I was able to continue it and keep everything, all of the curves looking fairly organic and natural and planned, I would have kept it. But ultimately I discovered after goofing around for a little while longer that it wasn't meant to be. It's one of those shapes that it doesn't happen because it's a fortunate accident. It's one of those things where it's just the beginning of chaos. And if we continue to try and push our luck, it doesn't get any better, it only gets worse. And talking about this convergence and all of these different shapes coming together at the same time, this spot right here is where things start to just go irreparably bad. I had this idea for a uniform, very simple shape, but very uniform for the front end of the ship. And already we've got part of the hull is kind of caving in, and we've got this business up here along this top curve where we're about to start diverging from that curve. You can see this block that I just placed is another one. continuing that whole trend of not lining up with the blocks that came before them. Not always a bad thing, but not what I had in mind. So you see, we kind of finished it off, and I actually went back and reworked it. You'll see here the post rework look. It's a very subtle difference, but the point is it's uniform all the way across the front, which is what I was going for. And all I had to do was kind of go back, remove a few things, and then put them back in a more orderly fashion so that they lined up when they came together a little bit better. Bob's your uncle. Life is good. This part here is the beginning of probably the beefiest of the outriggers, and talking about having certain elements detached from the rest of the ship so that if they get destroyed, we've got other elements elsewhere that are not destroyed, a little bit of redundancy, and hopefully, it'll look kind of cool. So I decided, first of all, that I would just kind of do some of the layout for the outer hull component of things, and then actually finish off, once that was done, by extending those armored blocks that we've got around the core. And the whole idea is we'll have like a armored skeleton inside the ship that's sort of holding everything together, so that if we've got these outer hull sections taking a bit of a beating, by the time they punch through the outer hull sections, we can rotate other outer hull sections into play so that we've got that little bit of extra protection. But if we're out of outer hull sections to rotate into the way of the incoming fire, we've got a robust skeleton that's less mass than if we were to build the entire outer hull out of the armored blocks. And that's kind of a balancing act that I want to play around with a little bit. Maybe it's not that much of a concern. One of the things that I really liked about the Spirit that I talked about in the last episode was the speed while it was boosted. It was very, very fast relative to the drone that you start the game with. And I liked that feature. So I now have a bit of a frame of reference. Once we've finished building this ship, we can all, take it out for a bit of a run and hit the boost and see how fast it goes, and see whether we actually have more wiggle room than I would have expected to put more armored blocks in place of the regular iron blocks, etc., etc. The whole idea is that I don't want to just transition from no armor blocks to all armor blocks, because I want to get a feel for how they impact the whole performance of the ship, and doing things a little bit more gradually in this case I think will be for the best. If I decide after the fact that I want more armor blocks, the game makes it pretty easy from what I've seen to transition your iron blocks to the new blocks fairly easily just by selecting them and using the upgrade or whatever the specific naming is. There's that option at the transition or whatever. You have that option to upgrade the blocks without having to pull things apart and rebuild them. So that's another bonus that I'm kind of looking forward to. At this point, just like I did with the front end, I have an idea of how I want this to play out. There's a little bit of room for flexibility in terms of not having to make it perfect relative to what's in my head, but not wanting to be too eager to compromise and sort of put things off when I know that I'm going to be changing them in the future anyways. Like I've talked about in the past, sometimes the best thing you can do is just put what you've got in your head into play and keep an eye on it with an open mind. And if you decide later that you want to change it, then you can do that. The worst thing I've found that I can do is not do anything because I don't know precisely what I want to do. And consequently, you don't even have a frame of reference in terms of something that didn't work. It's always better to have something that didn't work, that became the catalyst for something that did, than to have nothing and remain nothing because there's no incentive to add more if you're still uncertain about what you want to try. So that's kind of an approach that I've been using for a while. I've been talking about it for a while, and it applies here as well. I'm basically trying to do a 90-degree curve that's a soft curve on the inside and also is following around sort of an oblong shape. So it's a little bit tricky. You can see here talking about adding mass to the ship. It's just iron blocks, but it's a pretty big slab of iron by the time all of the pieces are put into place. And the shape is pretty much in line with what I had in mind. So now I'm looking at making this transition, finishing off the transition to this outrigger and then eventually when it's all done, once everything's taken care of, it'll merge with that top section of the ship, and everything will just kind of look organic and planned and well designed. That's the goal. We'll see whether or not it ends up. So the next episode, we're going to pick up exactly where we left off here. We're going to finish off getting this outrigger in place. We're going to put the nacelle on the end of the outrigger, and then depending on time, we'll start working on some of the other areas and just sort of filling it out as we go along. Once we get the key structural elements in place, then we can start looking at the cosmetic things that we can add just to kind of spruce it up a little bit. Lots of ideas. It's not going to be a big, long, epic master build, but it is going to be, I think, definitely a step up on the Spirit, both in terms of form and function. And I was actually quite happy with the form of the Spirit, so that's saying something. So if you want to be notified about the next episode, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information box below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.